All right, we are live. All right, so check. Everything is looking how it should. Okay,
I totally forgot to mute. Sorry.
No, that's fine. I realized I have the easy part this time because I'm the host, so I don't have to open another tab. I can just reply on the side. Okay, great. We already have some people here. That's always exciting.
Wow.
Okay. So I figure we'll kind of give it just a couple minutes like we usually do, just to see if we have some people trickle in. Let me pull it up on YouTube. I don't know why I always feel the need to check that it's doing what it's supposed to, but I do.
I totally understand.
It's like, I know it should be fine, but do I trust it? Okay,
Don't
good.
trust
It
any
is.
technology. Thanks for asking.
Yes. All right. It looks like everything is going well. Okay, great. And I saw that Helen finished on Goodreads as well. So
Oh.
Everyone in the 11th hour. I love it.
yeah.
It's usually me.
Yeah.
I finished it like 15 minutes before the live show started. I had the audiobook and I was like, let's get this up to 2.20 speed.
Yep, speed round. Yeah, I saw one of Helen's later updates before she finished. Like, I don't even remember what part it was, but it was just like, bro, what? And I was like, yep.
Could have been about so many things, really.
It really could be. I was like, this could mean like a number of different things. Okay. I figure we'll give a couple more minutes just because I know that Helen was planning to join. So
yeah.
we'll
She's always
see.
putting the kiddos to bed before live shows. She's an au pair, so.
Right. So yes, that can take longer than planned.
Yeah. While we're waiting for people, I'm curious Taylor, you just said you were listening to the audiobook. I don't know if you did that for the whole thing, but what edition of the book do you guys have?
Oh.
That's my favorite question every month.
I have this one. It has the Netflix film sticker that you cannot remove because it's attached to the cover. And it keeps saying at the back, now a Netflix film starring Lily James, Armie Hammer, and Kristen Scott Thomas. So great.
Yeah. I have never in my entire life heard from somebody who likes non-removable stickers. Like, why do they do this?
It's not for readers, it's for non-readers.
Right.
They're like, hey, you don't read books, but we know you watch Netflix. Did you know this is on Netflix? You can read it. No one wants this.
Maybe it's like an advertising thing. They're like, we'll take all this money from you and we'll promise that nobody will ever be able to look at this cover without being reminded of Netflix.
And imagine how awful it would be to be like the cover designer and then to see them slap that ugly sticker right over your work. You're like, thanks.
Yeah. Well, and even book clubs where it's like a book that you're really excited about, so you're like happy it got picked for a really popular book club. It's like, why would you do this? Like Firekeeper's Daughter, I'm really excited to read it and the cover is stunning. And I'm like, Reese Witherspoon, I'm glad you chose this, but did you have to print it onto the cover that you liked this book?
Yeah.
Why?
Even a sticker that you can remove would be fine, I guess.
Yeah, because then if somebody didn't mind, they can leave it on there. But yeah my edition, I really love. It's
gorgeous.
It's the 80th anniversary Virago edition, which was a surprise present for Christmas a few years ago from my mom. and I really love this one. I also find it super interesting that the title, I don't know if you can see it, it does not show up well on camera. The title is not anywhere on the front of the book.
Yeah, it's just the
Ooh.
Like,
R.
it just says R, and like you have to look at the spine, which I just find very psychologically interesting. Like,
I love it.
That's
yeah.
the edition that I was trying to find online when I was book hunting, because I got it from the library the first time I read this book. Spoilers for when we talk about that. But I ended up being like, I don't really care for any of the other covers. So ironically, I did buy the Netflix one just because the covers are so pretty. Like the water, the fire, like I get it. So if we just cover that up and don't worry about that, beautiful cover.
Yeah,
And
the color scheme is
beautiful.
pretty.
And the spine has it. Like I just
Ooh.
Yeah.
and you see Mrs. Danvers back there?
Oh, I love that. I
Oh,
didn't even
wait.
notice
Show that again.
Wait,
Oh, she's just like lurking. I love it.
Oh.
lurking. Yeah, I like that little detail. She's been
Okay, and
she finished.
yes, Helen has joined us. We can officially start. Um, okay, so hello everybody. My name is Kara. My channel is Wild Book Garden, which I assume you know if you are here. Um, and this is our Past It Classics discussion of the novel Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. I don't know why I'm showing my edition since it doesn't have the title on it, but just trust me that that's what we read. And there we go. Julia is showing hers. So we are going to jump into our discussion of the novel. But before we do that, I'm going to have my lovely co-hosts introduce themselves. They are both on a short booktube hiatus right now because they have a lot going on, but they are working their way back in. So we're going to show them some love and encourage them to come back. Um, Also, if you look in the description box, I have already linked both of them, as well as Kier from Kier the Scrivener, because I shamelessly stole a discussion question from her with permission. But just wanted to give her a shout out too. So, Taylor, let's go ahead and start with you to introduce yourself and just talk a little bit about like the kinds of things you normally read and what you do on your channel.
Okay, so I'm Taylor from Page Screen Taylor, and like Kara said, I'm on a bit of a hiatus, but I'm hoping for a sort of early summer return, so we'll keep our fingers crossed. I read classics, obviously, romance, and I'm sort of moving towards adult fantasy as well. So that's my whole deal.
Sounds good. All right, Julia.
Cool. Yes. Yeah, I'm Julia. My channel is called Shakespeare and Such, which if you are, really using your noggin here, you'll figure out that I do read a lot of Shakespeare. So I talk about him a lot, and a lot of Shakespeare retellings amongst other classics. But other than that, yeah, pretty good mix. Some YA, some middle grade, some romance more now, especially historical romance, a lot of historical fiction in general. Just a decent mix. And I'm also hoping to return very soon now that I have a functioning fully laptop that will make editing a lot easier. So
Very exciting. Okay, so before we get into our discussion questions, I do want to mention, as we have been doing for the last couple of live shows, a couple of content things that might come up. I definitely don't think this is going to be heavy on those aspects. Like if you were there for the children's hour, it's not going to be anything like that. But just a couple of things that may briefly come up are cancer and basically like assisted suicide, kind of. But again, I think those will be very brief. But just know that we may discuss those a little bit, just so that everyone is prepared. And if you would rather not be here for that, we totally understand. And I think those are the only ones I can think of that may come up. Can you guys think of anything else?
Not anything off the top of my head. I think you covered the two main
yeah.
ones.
I mean, I
Okay.
guess brief potentially mention of incest, though it's not very
Oh,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
that might come up, might not, who knows.
Yeah, the like kissing cousins thing. Yes,
Yeah.
that will.
Ooh.
I think that's what TV tropes calls it. So that's yeah, that may come up a little as well. Okay, so to start off our discussion, I'm going to ask you guys for like your overall thoughts on the book, your rating if you would like to share that, and also your previous experience with Daphne du Maurier. So that includes this novel, any of her other works that you have read or seen adaptations of. And let's start with Julia this time.
Okay, yes. Okay, I'm actually going to open Goodreads as I'm talking because I know there's another du Maurier that I started reading at some point and did not finish. So I think that's worth mentioning, but I don't know what the name of the book is. It's like one of her early ones. Daphne du Maurier book list. Come on, internet. Help me out. Nope, not that, not that, not that. Uh, I'll find it later. So I've started one of her books, did not finish it, but this is the only one that I've read in full, and I've actually read it twice now, so that's fun. And I read it like 6 months ago, so
Yeah.
not very long before I reread it, but it was worth it. I'm glad I did. And I gave it 4 stars overall. I just think, despite the things that I'm like, I wish that wasn't like that, just her
Mhm.
writing really takes it over the top for me. So,
Yeah.
like, who can make flowers suspenseful and
I
like
know.
scary? Like, she makes flowers seem ominous. And I'm like, how do you do that? It's amazing. So, yeah.
Yes. Yes. All right, Taylor, same questions.
So I've never read a Daphne du Maurier book. This is my first experience with her as a writer. Um, I have a lot of experience with Rebecca the film, and that was actually how I was introduced to her, like Daphne du Maurier as a whole. So this is my first experience with her, and overall, I like the book. I'm a little conflicted on my feelings, so I'm stuck between a 3.5 and 4 star, and I think maybe as the discussion goes, it'll probably solidify it. But I think part of it is just I'm so biased because I love the movie.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
felt like the book was just a little too long for me.
Mm-hmm.
It has some pacing issues.
I can see that. And then, so for me, this is also, I think it's my second time. It may be my third, but I'm pretty sure it's my second. And I first read it several years ago. It's been a while now. Um, and I've read 2 other novels by Daphne du Maurier. One is My Cousin Rachel, which I think is excellent. I think in some ways I like it even more than Rebecca. So I really enjoyed that one. And then in December, I read House on the Strand, which was one of my least favorite books of the year. So it's been an interesting experience. But yeah, I mean, not that I've had like an especially wide experience with her novels, but yeah, and I did still really enjoy this book this time around. It was actually interesting because in between reading it the first time and reading it the second, I had also watched the 1940
Yeah.
Hitchcock movie? Yeah. Which I think is excellent as well. I really enjoyed that. And it had been so long since seeing that movie and reading the book for the second time that I had forgotten some of the things they changed, which was really interesting this time. So it was kind of like I got to be surprised by some things again, which was interesting.
Cool.
And yeah, I also gave this one a 4 stars, which is the same thing I gave it the first time. I think she's an excellent writer. The way she can build atmosphere and creepiness out of things that shouldn't be creepy. It's funny, Julia, you mentioned the flowers because that's actually one of the quotes I'm going to share. I just think she's excellent at it. I think she's so good at making suspense out of like not a lot actually happening. Yeah, the only real like negatives for me are kind of like what you said, Julia, and Taylor as well, is like some parts felt a little long and there were some like storytelling choices I didn't love as much. But just overall as a novel, I think it's just very well executed. And like just the gothic atmosphere is top notch. Um, yeah, so I also really enjoyed it. And so we're going to start out with some character questions. And my first one is, let's talk about the main character, who is very famously unnamed. And I have a question about that, but first I just want kind of your overall impressions on her.
Wait, can I say something really quick about her name? I was in the middle of reading and I was like, I just wish I knew her name. And then I thought I could like hack the system. I was like, but if I go on IMDb, what's she credited as? And it was like Mrs. De Winter, and I was like, of course.
Yeah.
I was like, oh yeah.
Yeah, I've seen her referred to as I when people talk about the novel, or like the second Mrs. De Winter. Yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah. But my thoughts on her overall as a character are interesting. There are parts of her character I really like. Like I enjoy, even though we see her pretty much the same age through the whole novel, I like her description of herself as like being childlike and naive and like not knowing things, and then how that develops and changes throughout the novel, especially when the doo-doo really hits the fan, you know? She's like, I actually saved a quote about it. She was like, I'm not a child anymore. Da, da, da. And I was like, ooh, wow. But I also feel like, wow, grow a backbone maybe. Like, I just think she's got some unhealthy relationships in her life that she doesn't know quite what to do with. And by that, I mean every relationship in her life is unhealthy, except her
Yeah,
relationship with Frank. Frank can do no wrong, but we'll get to him.
Frank. Yeah,
Um, but yeah, she's an interesting character. I'll give her that. She's
yeah,
interesting.
yeah. Um, Taylor, go ahead.
So I do like the main character. There's a little bit of that secondhand embarrassment when you read her early on because she is so immature and so insecure, and it's easy to forget that she is 20 and she's so much younger than like I think every other character in the book.
Yes.
And it shows. And so I think du Maurier's writing on her was really good because maybe some of the secondhand embarrassment was like, oh God, I think I was like this when I was 20.
Fair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But seeing her grow and mature was great. I think, I always feel incredibly sad for the narrator, and I'm not entirely sure if it's for all of the reasons that the book intends for them to be. Because I keep thinking, like, girl, get some friends your own age.
I know.
Yeah. And,
Love yourself.
your youth is like, just be young and so on. But I think she's really well written. I think her journey is very interesting. And the fact that she is so insecure really plays into the plot of the book.
Yeah.
Right.
I also enjoyed her overall. I definitely think she is very relatable in some ways. Like the extended imagination sequences that she has, where she's like, everyone's gonna love me, and they're gonna be like, who is that? And she's just like imagining like at this beautiful like ball, and she's in this like like magnificent dress, and she's just fantasizing about always knowing the right thing to say. And I'm like, I feel this. So yeah, I think some of even like the secondhand embarrassment moments, I agree that some of them were like, yeah, I would probably have done this or thought this at 20, possibly even now. Um, and I also think even though she can be a little bit like frustratingly naive at times, I think it makes sense. And I think a lot of it is because literally nobody will tell her anything, which was very annoying. Like honestly, I was more frustrated like on the because of the other characters doing that to her than that I was like reading her and being like, oh my gosh, that's such a dumb choice. Like when that would happen, I'd be like, this is why you should communicate. Like so that was one thing, is like I didn't actually blame her for most of the dumb choices she made because I could always understand why she made them, which is
I
something
only blame her for one.
yeah, which is something I personally really appreciate, is like I don't have to be fully on board for everything a character does if you make me see why they do it, and I definitely understood. Yeah, it was definitely hard like reading some of her self-esteem issues, and just yeah, it's like you wanted to tell her, it's like, please like make some other friends like who are your age, and like find a hobby that's not your husband, like um and yeah, I also agree, Taylor, about like feeling sad for her, and I think it's in ways that the book doesn't necessarily intend us to. Like there's some of that as well, but it's also there's like this very melancholy feeling of like of still not knowing if she knows that she's important at the end of the book, and I'm not sure how much of that is intentional, but yes, very interesting character. And my follow-up question for her is, why do you think she's unnamed? And why, like, what do you think that accomplishes in the story?
Go for it, Taylor.
Okay. I wrote about the film a lot in college. So my interpretation of the fact that she has no name kind of stems from the fact that, one, she's very young and she doesn't really have an identity outside of either her husband as Mrs. De Winter or Rebecca when she's referred to as the second Mrs. De Winter. She doesn't really like her personality or her identity doesn't really take shape, and for most of the book her entire world revolves around these two people. So that's kind of my interpretation of why she's unnamed. Just she doesn't really seem to exist or have any sort of like self-actualization outside of them for the majority of the book. And even at the end, her life still revolves around her husband. She just transforms into the new Mrs. De Winter.
Yeah. I also want to point out, Kier has an excellent point here. Just don't marry a murderous middle-aged man and you'll be good. I think somebody should have given her that advice, truly.
The narrator was a little too chill with how things played out.
Oh, we will get to that. I have some issues. Julia, what do you think?
Yeah, I very much agree with what Taylor said. I mean, obviously, the title of the book is Rebecca. She just has this like oppressive hold over the whole story, even though she's dead for the whole thing. You know, like she is the center of the whole thing. And I think just the way the main character feels so overshadowed by her is why it was like, yeah, I mean, it's not even worth mentioning my name because it's all about Rebecca here.
Yeah. I agree with both of you guys. And I also think that there may be an element of like almost encouraging the reader to like self-insert a little bit. Because I think she's kind of supposed to be like an ordinary person who gets like swept up into all of this madness. And I kind of wonder if by not naming her, that makes her a little bit more relatable. But I think also, like, primarily, I think it's a huge reflection of the fact that she doesn't feel like she has any identity outside of her husband and his first wife. And I was trying to think of any other books I had read where the title is a character that's not on page at all. And I'm sure there are some that have done this, but I can't think of any. And I'm like, it'd be like calling Wuthering Heights Catherine, you know? Because that's another book where like even the characters that aren't present have this huge like influence on the story and they feel very present. But yeah, I think you guys like really covered that. I think okay, and then this is like we've talked about this a little bit, but I also wanted to know if you guys had any more thoughts on, I guess, like one of her defining features is her naivete, which Maxim is like very turned on by and got some issues with that. But yeah, any thoughts on that? Do you think that's her fault? Like, yeah, I guess that's my question.
I mean, I don't think it's fair to call it her fault because, like, we know she's orphaned and I mean, do we even hear much of her backstory before she was Mrs. What's her name? Van Hoppers? Is that her name?
Right. Yeah.
Like before she was what even was her job name?
She's like a companion. Yeah.
Companion. Thank you. I was like lady's maid. That's not. Before she
we
was.
really don't. Yeah.
So it's
we know that she was orphaned, and we know that she wasn't like she had pretty much like a generically, I guess, unhappy school years. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, but I mean, they talk about like once she gets to Manderley, how she doesn't have the breeding and stuff for this setting.
Yeah.
So I mean, clearly she's just like kind of a nobody who just got swept up in the middle of all this craziness. And like, who would have thought when you're just off doing your job, traveling around, that some man old enough to be your father would be like, marry me, you fool. And then you'd just be like, okay, it's better than what's going on. So
yeah.
So it's like I don't blame her, but
yeah. I do
the same in her position. I don't know.
Yeah. I do remember this was like, and we're gonna talk briefly about the movie later, but not too much because that wasn't like an official, like we never want to like officially require a movie for the book club. But I have like one question about it later. But I do want to mention that the first time I read the novel, I was really enjoying it, but I was reading the beginning and I was like, this makes no sense. Like why would she go with this guy? He's so obviously sketchy. Like it was like almost to the point of like being a plot hole where I'm like, why would you even do this? And then I saw the film version with Laurence Olivier and I'm like, oh, okay. Like he's actually charming. Like that at least makes more sense why like an impressionable, young girl would be so flattered and so like desperate to get out of her situation that she'd be like, yeah, I'll take a chance on this guy. Yeah. Just wanted to throw that out there.
Also, Laurence Olivier's De Winter is just the slightest bit kinder to her.
He is, yes. Love the mug, Julia.
I wanted to be gothic, you know?
Yes. Yes.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Taylor.
Answer the question, which I forgot as soon as I opened my mouth. What was it then?
It was just kind of like a follow-up about the narrator and like kind of how naive she is and if that's her fault is, I think, my original question.
So I agree with what Julia said. She doesn't really have many people in her life, and I understand her being swept away by things. And she also comes in at a disadvantage because of her breeding. The one thing I blame her for is trusting Mrs. Danvers with that costume idea.
Yes.
That one was just dumb.
Yes.
Book, she's like, oh, this lady's my enemy. And then she's like, good idea, Mrs. Danvers. I like that costume too.
Yeah, that's the one too where I'm like, I think you should know better by now. I also want to mention Helen pointed out the part where she was like, he was my father, son, and brother, and I'm like, none of these are okay.
He was my husband.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. Oh boy, there's a lot to deal with in that. So let's talk about Maxim.
Sorry.
Yeah. I don't really have a particular question with him because there's just like so much. But I don't know who would like to go first. I forgot whose turn it was already.
I think it's Taylor's turn.
All right, Taylor, go for it.
I hate Maxim so much. I do have to wonder what the narrator sees in him, because he's more than twice her age. Mm-hmm. Like, other than the money. Like, if she was just chasing the money, I'd be like, you know what? I get it. But she's not. She genuinely loves him, and I don't know why. He's mean to her. He's condescending. He treats her like a child, and sexualizes it for some reason. He doesn't explain anything to her. He just sort of drops her in his upper class world and doesn't teach her anything.
Yeah.
I don't know. He just basically leaves her alone, and the narrator is blaming herself for their failed marriage, but it's him. He's the one who's failing their marriage. And are we talking spoilers now?
I think so. I'm pretty sure everyone has finished the book. I think you can talk spoilers.
Okay, cool. And like, I get that Rebecca was terrible, but the fact that he murdered her is like, and I don't like him. I like his function in the story. He's like, I think, a good gothic hero, but
yes.
I just hate him.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. It's like, if I was in that position, I don't think I would find him charming. So I have to imagine that Maxim is just like the hottest 45-year-old in the world, because otherwise I don't know what she sees in him. Like, even in his nicer moments, he's like pretty lukewarm. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I will say, shoot, what was I going to say? Oh, maybe we're going to talk about this. Maybe we won't. When I was rereading this specifically, was looking for parallels to Jane Eyre, because I think good. It's coming.
There's a question about it.
I think Mr. Rochester is way better than Maxim.
Ooh, really?
So, yeah.
At least strongly disagree.
He made it apparent that he did love her. Like, wow, that's a step up. So it's just, I have a lot of mixed feelings, but I do hate Maxim a lot, and I don't fall for his charms at all.
Because they're what?
There are very few charms to begin with.
Yeah. I also hate him. I can only imagine that we like skipped over parts where he was being charming, because they reference how nice he was during their honeymoon or whatever, and I'm like, I guess, but like, he's never, like, none of the things we see on page are him treating her well. And I agree too with well, I mean, basically all the things that you guys dislike about him. Taylor, when you said that he just kind of, I mean, he basically like throws her to the wolves with this, like these people, like how does he not know that Mrs. Danvers is going to make her life miserable? Like she was obsessed with Rebecca, and she's also just like she doesn't like anybody. Like she's just rude to everyone, and especially somebody taking Rebecca's place. Like how did he not know this was going to happen? He's like, she's a really good housekeeper, so I kept her, and I'm like, okay. Yeah, and the fact that he treats her like a child but also sexualizes her. And there's like several times where like the narrator is like, and then he patted me on the head like a dog.
Like a dog.
And I was like, yeah, so it's very hard for me. Like I basically just have to tell myself she loves him and you need to accept it because there's no way to make it make sense to me. And I also, yeah, it's like he's legitimately a murderer. Yeah. And I have some real issues, which we probably will talk about later, but I have some real issues with like he confesses to her that he killed his first wife and she's like, so you didn't love her? Yeah. And like she does that. Yeah. And like this is before she even knew like the circumstances and that Rebecca was like actually kind of a terrible person. Like whether or not you think that absolves Maxim of what he did. It's like she didn't know any of the backstory. Like she just knew that her husband had killed the previous woman that he was married to, and she's like, so this means you didn't love her, right? And it's just, yeah, it's just really uncomfortable to read a lot of that because it's a while before she finds out the backstory, and at no point is she like, maybe the fact that my husband has already killed one wife should make me a little nervous. Yeah. Also, Nana has just said that I think she got manipulated so bad. I agree. And I think also his reasons for marrying her are just very, very selfish. Like it was to make himself feel better. And because she was so different from Rebecca, it would like distract him. And it's like, okay, so you could have done something to mitigate what was going to happen to her. Like you could have prepared her better. You could have like not hired Mrs. Danvers again. You could have actually been there for her and talked to her. And I remember there's one point where she very timidly is like, maybe you could have told me some of this earlier. And he's like, you didn't ask me. And it's like, oh yeah, she should have been like, hey, just to clarify, did you murder your previous wife? I'm just curious.
Like, just wondering.
Also, how did no one come to the conclusion that Maxim may have like killed his wife because he killed his wife, waited 10 months, and then showed up with a younger bride in less than a year?
But a less pretty bride, Taylor. Don't get it twisted. She's super plain.
She was plain and poor, so nobody suspected. Yeah.
And I was going to say, I do think he does say at one point, in, God forbid I say in Maxim's defense, I think he does say, like, Danvers would have been too suspicious if he had fired her right after Rebecca's death. So there was that. But it's like, yeah, but when you're coming back, be like, Mrs. Danvers, we don't need you anymore. Like, I don't know. Come up with an excuse. Come on now.
Or at least kind of be there as, like, a buffer so that the main character doesn't feel so alone, because like she is so isolated. And it also really bugs me how like after Maxim like confesses to her and like he explains everything, then they have like that scene where it's like he actually seems to be romantically interested in her and they're like making out in the library or whatever, and she's like, we could have been doing this the whole time. He's like, I was just too sad, like we couldn't. And I'm like, okay, so supposedly he felt this way the whole time, but I think there are ways to communicate that he cared about her while still, like, I don't know if that makes sense. Do you know what I mean? It's like there are ways that he could have, like, shown that he actually cared about what happened to her and saw her as a romantic partner without, like, compromising the drama of the story, you know? Like, because it kind of felt like we went from 0 to 100, and it did not convince me. Kier says, adding to first date questions, have you killed any of your previous partners? Yeah, little did we know that that's something you had to specifically ask about.
Murder. Thoughts?
Yeah, right. What's your previous experience? I just want to know. Okay, so Any other thoughts on Maxim before we move on to some other characters?
No. Will you guys remind me, because it's not really related now, remind me at some point to talk about Taylor Swift?
Okay.
Thanks.
I'm going to write down Julia, Taylor Swift.
Great. It's relevant, I promise.
Okay. Okay, so if we don't have any more thoughts on Maxim, although I'm sure he will come up later, let's talk about Rebecca. So, what do you guys? This is another one where like I have a follow up, but I don't want to influence the discussion. So, just like thoughts and responses on Rebecca.
Julia, would you like to go first?
Sure. You know, the little bit of, not little bit, I'm very feminist, but like the feminist side of me wants to go, wow, she really was living her own life, like kind of a milady sort of thing, you know, and just be like, good for her, but also I hate her. I think she's a terrible person. I don't like the way she manipulated literally everyone in her life. And yeah, not a fan. Don't like her.
Yeah. Taylor, thoughts?
I'm kind of on the same page as you, Julia. I think at one point I tweeted, "Is Rebecca a gaslight gatekeep girl boss?" And like, I hate the term girl boss for a lot of reasons, but I'm kind of like, Rebecca's kind of a girl boss. But like, other than that, I'm aware that she's a terrible person, and I just love her presence in the book. I always refer to Rebecca as a ghost story without a ghost. You know, there's Rebecca herself isn't haunting the walls, but all of the memories of her, the fact that she redecorated Manderley the way she liked it, like she is everywhere in the book. And I feel like Daphne du Maurier puts a lot of work into making us feel her presence everywhere. And I love that. And I love her as a character and her function in the story. And I love that she never shows up. You know? We don't know what she really looks like. And this is more in reference to the movie, but even in the book, we just know that she has pale skin and dark hair and that she was really beautiful. And it's kind of like a reverse Rosemary's Baby. You can never tell us what she looks like because what we have in our head is always going to be more beautiful than what they can describe to us or show us. And I love that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think also what you said about like the presence that she has in the book, like both through like the actual physical touches that she has left on the house, and also even the way that the narrator, like the main character, will kind of like imagine her presence everywhere. It's almost like she's not like summoning her ghost, but she's kind of playing into that, you know, like she's giving her presence like a form, even if it's imaginary. Yeah, I also like with Rebecca, it was very interesting because I was also thinking about some of the other female villains we have read recently, specifically Milady from Three Musketeers and Kathy from East of Eden. And compared to them, I'm like, Rebecca is the one that I find least bad. Like she's still like not a good person, and obviously like cheating is never okay. But compared to like Kathy and Milady, who were like straight up killing people, I was like, oh, okay. So like Rebecca, like the reason that she's like this horrible monster is essentially that she wasn't who she was acting like, and that she was like sleeping around and like cheating on Maxim, which again, like not okay. Cheating is not okay, especially since like they didn't go into the marriage agreeing that it was going to be like a convenience thing. But yeah, it's interesting like the way that they talk about her and how like disgusting and reprehensible she is, and like the language they use about her, and like they make it sound like she's murdering children in the backyard or something. And it's like really she's just kind of like doing what she wants. Honestly, the part that I find most like personally I guess off-putting about her is like Julia, what you mentioned, which is that she's like lying to everybody, and like the fact that she makes everyone love her, and like secretly she hates them and thinks they're idiots. Like that's the thing that I'm like, that's offensive to me. And I think part of that too is because by the time we find out exactly what she's been doing, I already hate Maxim so much that I'm like, oh, your wife didn't love you? sad.
No.
Gee, I wonder why.
Yeah.
No, this sticks in my brain, lives in my head rent free. I'm always curious because Maxim talks about that scene where they drove up to the cliff in Monte Carlo, where she like confesses some awful thing to him. And I'm like, what did she do? I want to know, because I feel like that wasn't just like, oh, everyone thinks I'm sweet, but I'm a bitch. Let's drive home. Like, I feel like she really told him something, and I want to know what it is.
Yeah.
I wonder. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, Taylor.
So my interpretation was that she was she told him about her like promiscuity or something.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's
she's like
what
two things I love: lying and boys.
Yeah. That's also what I kind of assumed from that, is that she told him that she slept around. I was also wondering if like there was maybe some element of, I don't know, like her sexual preferences that like she confessed. I mean, the way that like
Danvers?
she's described. What's that, Julia?
We'll get there. Go ahead. Keep going.
I was wondering, the way that they talk about her partners, they always seem to be men, but I was like, maybe that's something he considers really disgusting, is like if she was interested in women as well, or that there was maybe something that she was into, like sexually, that was like polite women did not do that or something. But yeah, I also assumed it was kind of just generally related to her sexual exploits, I guess you could say.
It could also be her cousin too.
Right. Or her cousin. Like, I was wondering about that. I'd have to check exactly like what year this book was originally published, but I was under the impression that at this point in time that was already considered like, you don't do that. Like, you don't sleep with your cousin. It's not done.
See, I figured, because no one in the book really batted an eye. Like, they did him, but they weren't like, but he's your cousin. So I was like, okay, this is still like Downton Abbey. They're chill, like they don't care. Copyright 1938, so it's pushing it.
Like, I mean, that's almost to the Second World War era.
Yeah, I don't know.
Which, I don't know, I guess I tend to think of that as one of the markers of like more modern, I guess, sensibilities about that kind of thing.
Sorry.
No, go ahead, Taylor.
I was going to say it might be something that's more common with the upper class, in that, like, you know, you're trying to you're marrying more for like money and status. So after a while, you just sort of run out of options.
Yeah, bred up in those blue bloods. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. I also wondered too if like it's almost like the fact that she was sleeping around was already so bad that they're like, all right, and it was your cousin, okay, you know, like that it almost like didn't register as that big a deal because it was already so shocking. Okay, and then my kind of like follow up to Rebecca, and this is kind of related to other questions. I realize this might be a very long live show, you guys. I'm sorry. I'm looking at the clock and I'm like, we have so much to cover. So I'm sorry if you're tuning in and you thought we were going to be on time this time. But do you think that Rebecca is the villain of the book?
Yes and no.
I agree with that.
I mean, if we're viewing it from our protagonist's viewpoint, yes, because she's the main. I mean, other than Mrs. Danvers, she's like the main thing standing in the way of her goals as a character. But you know, as an outside perspective, it's like, but look at Maxim. He's so awful.
Yeah,
he's the reason for all this.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I would also point out that I feel like there's three characters that the book is kind of like painting as the villainous ones, and that's Rebecca, Mrs. Danvers, and Jack Favell. I don't know if I'm saying his last name right.
I don't know.
I feel like those three are kind of like the bad guys, but I'm like, of the characters in this book, Maxim is the only one who has straight up murdered somebody. So
Mrs. Danvers kind of tried.
That's true. That's true. I had forgotten about that. So yeah, Mrs. Danvers is like borderline, but yeah, like of the characters in the book, I'm like, sorry, who's the one who killed somebody here? That's the husband. Like, one of the good guys, supposedly. Um,
Yeah. I see
yeah,
Rebecca as like an antagonistic force because
Mm.
she is clearly the narrator is clearly threatened by her, and her presence really causes not the narrator's downfall, but sort of like the beginning of some sort of descent into like madness or something, depending on which way you're doing it. But it gets to her. But
yeah,
I don't know if that's entirely Rebecca's fault. Like, obviously, she can control how people talk to her, and we know that she controls a lot of the narrative around her image. But a lot of that, the reason Rebecca's presence gets to the narrator so much is that she's deeply insecure. That's
Mhm.
not particularly Rebecca's fault.
yeah,
But she is an antagonistic force. I would consider, obviously, Maximilian, I hate, and I think he is the worst. But I think maybe Mrs. Danvers is probably more of a villain than.
yeah, yeah. And I think also one of the reasons that I don't rank Rebecca as badly as some of the other villains we have read is that I feel like Rebecca, even when she's doing bad things, she doesn't hurt people who had nothing to do with it. Like, yeah, we say it's like we don't condone what she did, and like cheating on your partner is wrong, but it's like the only person that she's really hurting is Maxim, who's like kind of a piece of shit. So it's like hard to feel that sorry for him, except on principle. um, but it's not like any of her other actions like hurt innocence necessarily. Like, I mean, the main character, like as you said, Taylor, the fact that Rebecca is such an antagonistic force towards her is not actually Rebecca's fault. Like, she's been dead before this happened. So it's like, it's not really like she's not intentionally messing up their lives. Well, maybe Maxim's. Like, we're kind of meant to believe that she planned for him to get caught for murder, which kind of seems only fair because he did murder her. But, um,
You're gonna murder me. You're gonna get caught for it. Haha.
yeah,
You hate to see a girl boss win.
Julia, I expect some girl boss memes about Rebecca. So just so you know.
Rebecca and her shelf full of MLM products, like.
Oh my god! Yeah. Rebecca sells Lululemon.
Town buying her stuff though. She'd be so good at it.
She would be. She would be. I don't even remember where I was going with this point. Kier does mention, yes, she's a jerk to the man from the village because of ableism. Yes, there is some. Poor Ben. There is like some period attitudes towards disability throughout the book. That's a good point. Okay, I think that pretty much covers it. Yeah, so I would agree with you guys. Like, I think that Rebecca is like an antagonistic force. Like, she's a villain in the sense that like a lot of the conflict revolves around her, but it's not actually. A lot of it is not actually like from her decisions, or it's not like her intent. So I don't really view her as like the most like morally reprehensible character. I also like I hate Maxim with the fire of 1,000 suns. So in comparison, I'm like Rebecca, she's living her life. And I would also agree that Mrs. Danvers is kind of runner up of like the person who is actually setting out to hurt people. Yes, I would agree with that. And let's go ahead and talk about Mrs. Danvers now. I want kind of your general thoughts about her, and I'm going to mention this question now. In the novel, I guess I was remembering it being a little more explicit, but she's basically in love with Rebecca, even though the book is like not super clear about that. And this also, I guess, ties into the movie a little bit, because the movie's ending changes some things about the story, and it made me think of our discussion for the Children's Hour, where Julia, you mentioned that because the movie was made during the Hays Code, they could show gay characters, but they had to show them in a way that like basically showed their lives being terrible because they were gay. And I also think this is a really interesting discussion because Daphne du Maurier herself was bisexual. So it's really interesting to like know that and then to read how Mrs. Danvers is written and coded. Okay, that's kind of like a lot. I'm sorry to give you such like a long question to respond to, but like any part of that you have thoughts on.
Go ahead, Taylor.
Okay. So I think in the book, Mrs. Danvers is supposed to be like an old woman. I imagined her as being very old and sort of a maternal figure to Rebecca. So I didn't interpret that as like romantic at all. The film, however, they really play into it, and part of that is just Hitchcock has a thing with portraying gay characters as evil, or at least coding them as gay. So that's just par for the course for Hitchcock. Huh?
I got beef with Hitchcock. That's all.
I have a lot of beef with Hitchcock. He's my favorite director, but my gosh.
Yeah.
It's a whole mess.
Good director, bad man.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I think with Danvers, at least, taking into account, because I just found out during this live show that Daphne du Maurier was bisexual, and I do wonder if part of why Danvers is so protective over Rebecca and so like driven to like hurt anyone who sort of tries to take her place is this sort of like, I can't be with Rebecca, but I'm going to defend her and like take care of her how I can. Not saying that her actions justify it at all, because the narrator didn't do anything.
Yeah.
But that coding is also kind of uncomfortable, at least in the film in particular, where there's a lot of associating Mrs. Danvers sort of like, you know, her obsession with Rebecca is unhealthy with the fact that she was probably in love with Rebecca, as opposed to like, maybe she's just a bad person.
Right, like that there's something inherently evil about her loving Rebecca, which like made her an evil person.
Yeah.
I think also like the part, this is interesting now because I'm trying to remember if I already knew that a lot of people like consider Mrs. Danvers to have been in love with Rebecca, like if I knew that before I read the book, or if I drew that conclusion and then saw it confirmed elsewhere, because I definitely think the movie plays that out more. I think this time around, the couple of parts where I thought it was supported more in the text, although it's not super clear, is like the thing, like when they're talking about like how useless men are and how like she's like, they just didn't understand Rebecca and we used to laugh at them and to like I forget what else she says, which not that by itself would be enough, but I think like in the context of the story, I think that was maybe a clue. And then also, I feel like there was some weird stuff about like her nightgown and like the way that she handled some of her, I guess, things that she left behind, which like, again, that's not like by itself enough, but I just remember like the tone of that feeling maybe less like a motherly relationship, although it is interesting because I do think that some of the times when she's talking about her, she does sound like more of a mentor figure. Although this book clearly like mixes those things a lot, so not necessarily impossible that both of those things could be true. I also wanted to mention Helen brought up the fact that when Maxim is talking about it, he made it sound like he had no choice. She's so evil, she made me kill her, and I agree. Like,
yeah,
that's a part that is like very irritating to read, to say the least. Is his reaction was like, well, now I've got to shoot you, why'd you make me do this? And it's like, you don't have to though, like yeah, he and when he's, I guess like it makes sense that when he's telling his current wife about her, he would make it sound like none of it was his fault, but yeah, just like the whole tone of like, pity me because I was forced to murder someone and I didn't want to.
He also went down to the boathouse with a gun, which in my opinion is like some sort of intent.
Yes.
Intent, my friend.
Yes. Yeah. Just so many problems with Maxim. Okay. Let's see. So did we have any other thoughts on Mrs. Danvers? Julia, did you answer the question? I don't remember if I interrupted you.
I mean, I was pretty much agreeing with everything you guys were saying. I do concur that the one scene where Jack's like, but Danny, you know, she was in love with me, right? And then she's like, ha, she used to come back and we would laugh at you. Men are stupid. Like, that's the part where my brain was like, lesbian, lesbian, lesbian. But
Yeah.
before that, we get a lot of her, saying things like, "Oh yeah, I helped to raise her, right?" And I'm like, then don't be in love with her, you weirdo. Like, that's not cool.
Yeah.
So
Like,
I don't know,
choose a
but,
lane.
yeah, she's
Age isn't going to stop anyone in this book. Sorry.
no, it's really not. They're like, I'm gonna fall in love with who I want, and it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Born baby, I'll just wait. Like, they're weird. They're weird. They're all
Yeah.
weird.
Yeah. Especially the fact that they will like draw attention to it later. Like, I think there's like a couple times where the book is like, remember Maxim is like 45? And I'm like, I know. Like, don't tell me again.
I can never forget. Thanks.
Yeah. And like does he say or does someone else say, or it's like, yeah, he's old enough to be your father. And I'm like, I know, don't bring it up.
I
Like,
think Maxim actually says that to her. Don't forget,
Ugh.
I could be your dad.
he's got
I'll
issues.
treat you like my daughter, except I kiss you. So how's that?
Yeah. 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 I also find it like super disturbing that the book more or less confirms like, oh no, they've been having sex this whole time, and I'm like,
Have they?
because like the narrator,
when?
she specifically thinks about like when they were on their honeymoon and how like now she knows him as like a lover and blah blah blah, and I think this was after the point when that meant like slept with and not just like I don't like courting, like if somebody was like making love to someone else, that could mean that they were just like pursuing them. I'm pretty sure this was like in the more current usage. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and just like some of the oblique references, I was like, I'm pretty sure that you guys are, and I didn't need to know this. Like,
Yeah. This marriage sucks, so I can't imagine why any of them would be up for that. But, I'm not them.
I also have a question. Do they sleep in separate beds?
Yeah.
I think they do, and that was like a
that's how I read it,
common.
and I was like, huh?
Yeah,
But that would be more time periody. Yeah.
yeah, especially because it's an old house. And I think that was common is like they would have like separate bedrooms and dressing rooms, and then I think there would also be a bed that they would sleep in together sometimes. That's
also
like my understanding at least. Unless I guess it could be that they each had like their own bed, but it was like big enough that they could both sleep in it. I don't know. Um, yes, Nana, I agree.
Oh,
um, yeah, just super gross. I feel like every question keeps coming back to Maxim is the worst, which is only fair because he is. Okay, we're going down the list slowly but surely. I'm sorry, I'm like I have so much that I want to talk to you guys about. All right, let's talk about the few like shining lights in this book. Frank, Giles, and Beatrice, like the trio of good guys. Like,
well, Giles is so in my opinion, but I like Frank and Beatrice.
yeah.
Sorry, do you have more you want to say, or just is that
Honestly, I just wanted to like talk about them as like
okay?
yeah,
Great.
the good guys. Like
Hopefully
the
you
break.
are fine with me just diving right in, because first
Please
of all,
do.
Frank's my favorite character. I love him. I'll talk about him in a second because I have more to say. Beatrice, in my mind, has like big Jordan Baker energy of The Great Gatsby, and I love her for it. I also feel like she's a lesbian as well, but that's fine. Maybe she's bi. She's married to a man. I don't know her life. I just, she's got like a fun, like aggressive, but well-meaning personality.
Yeah.
And she's very sporty. I'm being stereotypical, but still, I love her. That's my thoughts on Beatrice. Although it's very funny to me that she, like in the end, she's like, suicide, that's ridiculous. And they're like, shut up, Beatrice. Like, it's not ridiculous. It was suicide.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's just a funny bit.
Nobody clued her in.
Yeah, and for someone who's like pretty, like she seems like pretty in the know about most stuff and like observant of people's relationships, she just like really never figured out that her brother's a murderer. So that's interesting.
Yeah, even though like she did suspect something was off about Rebecca, which I thought was interesting. Like
Yeah.
actually all three of them did. That's interesting. The good guys knew.
But anyways, I love Frank. I don't know if you can see the the purple tabs, but those are all Frank passages because I think he's just a sweetheart. I really like Frank. So I was thinking about this in the shower before this live show. I was like, it reminded me of another totally separate book that I've read where this girl was like in this relationship and I just hated the guy so much. Mm-hmm. And then the guy's friend, who was like also his employee, was like, let's run away. I'll protect you from him. And I was like, Frank, do that. I just want that for you too. Like, he's older, but he's less old. And I feel like he's very well intentioned and he's just so nice.
Yeah. And he doesn't treat the main character like she's a baby, which is a huge plus. Yeah, like, and not something to be taken for granted, really. Yeah, I thought Frank was just the sweetest, and like, it had been so long since I had read the book the first time that I didn't remember all those details. I don't know if I even remembered Frank as a character, which is a travesty because he's like one of the best.
I hope he's in the movie.
I don't know.
He's in the new movie.
I think he is. He might have a different name.
Okay. That's funny. Like, we can't have you be named Frank. That's just, the suspension of disbelief is too much. What was I'm sorry, I just like forgot what I was saying in the middle of my sentence. You're talking about Frank. Oh yeah, so I didn't remember like basically anything involving him, and so when there's that line, I think it's from Jack Favell when he was like being a jerk, and he said something about how like, oh, and then Frank can comfort the grieving widow and he'll love that and blah blah blah. And I remember like reading that and I'm like, wait, does he have a thing for her? Because that would be so sweet and like so much healthier.
Like, yeah, Jack, you're right. Do it.
Yeah. Like, you're right, and you should say it, Jack. And then sadly nothing came of it, which like I knew that it wasn't going to work out, but I was like, honestly, I would even be comforted knowing that a decent guy had feelings for this main character, and it wasn't just like Maxim. And then, yeah, I also, like, Giles wasn't, like, bad or good. Like, I was pretty neutral on him, but considering some of the other characters, I was like, you're all right. And then I also really liked Beatrice. I just, like, really, like, she was just such a breath of fresh air. And I actually did remember from the first time I read it that I really liked Maxim's sister. Like, I didn't remember anything about her, but I remembered I really liked her. And, yeah, I still really like her here. I like that she's just, like, a very like practical person, and I feel like, and she's very compassionate as well, and I feel like all of her scenes were just a nice break from all of the like drama and the heaviness of the story. And yeah, so Taylor, sorry, what did you think about our little trio that I created?
So I love Frank too. I just love how supportive he was of our narrator. He actually did more for her than her own husband did. Putting in the work. The one thing that does sort of get me is that he is way too, like, he knows Maxim killed Rebecca, and he's just kind of like, we'll just cover this up. It's fine.
Yeah.
That's the one thing where I was like, Frank, just
do better.
Just let him take the fall for this.
Yeah.
But other than that, I loved Frank. I thought he was so pleasant. There are so many people who are just rude or mean or who compare the narrator to Rebecca so often, and he was just such a breath of fresh air. And for Beatrice, I also loved her. I thought she was great, and there was something about the way she was both really straightforward with the narrator, which I thought was refreshing, just very like, I'm going to tell it how it is, but also compassionate. Mm-hmm. One of my favorite scenes that was in the book that wasn't in the movie, so I was really happy to read it, was after the dress incident, when she runs upstairs and is like really upset. Beatrice is like, she follows her there, and she's like, listen, I know this sucks. My advice to you is to just like put on a different dress and go down to the party and like, just save face and do it. And like, maybe it's not the advice that the narrator needed, but I still thought like she still went up and checked on her. Her own husband didn't even do that. Like, I understand like if he actually liked Rebecca being shocked and upset,
yes,
but he doesn't even really talk to her about it. I'm sorry, I went right back to Maxim. I hate him.
No, please. It's all right.
Doing more than Maxim. And Giles, like Julia, you said, is like a completely neutral character, but the bar is in hell for men in this book. So and he cleared it, like, so.
Yeah.
And Giles in Purgatory was like, don't mind me, I'm just here.
Yeah, and to his credit, when Rebecca, it's like very strongly implied. They might have even told us that she like made a move on him. Giles was like not down for it at all. Which, you know, again, the bar is so low. It's like, you didn't cheat on your wife? Like, you get a cookie. But yeah, I think also it's like he wasn't like I didn't like love him like Beatrice and Frank, but he was all right.
And I think
And
he
yeah,
did
Taylor
with her at the party,
That's
which was
right.
nice.
That's right. That was really sweet when he like went out of his way to like dance with the main character and to talk about how pretty she looked in her dress because he thought she was upset because like she was disappointed about the dress and he was like, "You look very nice." So like, that's nice.
He's such like a sweet little buffoon.
Yes. Taylor, I really like that you brought up that they were like checking on her and that they like actually communicated with her. And I also really like that Frank and Beatrice and kind of Giles too a little bit. It's like one of the things that makes them the nice characters is that they do those like little social things that like Maxim doesn't think are important, but like actually kind of are to like make people feel like welcomed and everything. Like the fact that the main character thinks several times about like one of the nice things about Frank is that he always knows the like conventional and appropriate thing to say, so he never makes her feel stupid. And I'm like, that's like a really nice thing. Like, I think sometimes she thinks of him as being a little boring for that reason, but I'm like, if you were talking to somebody who never made you feel like you said something dumb, that would be so nice. Like,
yeah.
So I just like that. Yes, Julia.
I literally, so my friend Lulu, because we were talking about Shadow and Bone, unrelated, but she was like, yeah, you'd probably prefer Mal because, no offense, you like the more bland love interests. And I'm like, I do! Just give me a nice, boring guy. Like,
I think you have better taste than to like.
I just want someone who's normal and nice. So that's why I'm like, Frank, look at you. You're doing just everything you need to. You're considerate. You're not too much. You're just right there being supportive.
I think, not to get too far off topic, but I think Mal is bland and awful. I think you have better taste than to like him.
Well,
I don't.
We were talking about the show because
okay. Yeah, I haven't seen the show. I wanted to scroll back really quick because Kier had a theory that like blew Julia's mind. She had some theories halfway through that it might be Frank in the hotel as Maxim isn't name dropped in the beginning, and I wanted Frank and her to just leave this behind.
Listen, I'm gonna reread that scene immediately when we're done here.
Yeah, I didn't think about that either, and I'm curious now. Okay, I think. Did we have any other thoughts on those characters?
I think I'm good.
Okay. Alrighty. I think this character section took so long, you guys. I'm sorry. We had so many thoughts. Okay, we talked about this a little bit already, but do you guys have any other thoughts on the writing? I think that was something that we all really enjoyed. That was very effective and atmospheric, but any other thoughts on that? Taylor, do you want to go first?
Yeah. So I do like the writing style. I think it really, like we said, it's very atmospheric, which is perfect for a gothic novel like this. And getting into the main character's head in a way was really nice. And I think Daphne du Maurier does a great job with like characterizing her and like letting us see her inner thoughts. My biggest complaint is that I think sometimes Daphne du Maurier goes a little too hard on the atmospheric writing and has to describe every single thing. And if I had to read one more description of a tree, I don't know what I would do.
Yeah.
And like so, near the end, especially when she was like, we stopped and we had bread and tea on the way to like see Rebecca's doctor, and oh, the doctor was wearing a flannel shirt and slacks, and I'm like, this is irrelevant. Like, they were out at tea, and there was a child playing tennis behind the house. Why does that matter? It literally doesn't. Cut it out.
Yeah.
So that sort of grated on me, but I think she's a very talented writer, but I think she needs to sort of, well, I'm pretty sure she's dead, but the book would have benefited from if she was able to sort of go with the less is more approach. But that's just me. I'm not a huge fan of long descriptions in books.
Yeah. Julia, thoughts?
I was just replying to Helen. I love the trees too. No, that's actually, I'm a little bit the opposite. I think her pacing things for me that were issues were more like, oh, look at all this suspense, and all of a sudden, facts. Like, I would have preferred it more like evenly spaced out of like discovering things maybe. Whereas I could have read those nature descriptions for days. Every time she was like the rhododendrons, I was like, ah! And just like a lot about water and fire, both making a lot of sense to be in there. And yeah, I just, every time she wrote about flowers, I went, ooh-wee. And wait, I have to share this because it involves the writing and Jane Eyre, which I think we're going to get into. I have to find it though. So the scene when, okay, so there's one scene in here that's under a different tree. Okay, so like Maxim talks about like them like being under a tree or whatever when they're all like lovey-dovey in the beginning. And then later when like Beatrice comes over for the first time with Giles and all them, they put some chairs out under the chestnut tree, and I went, like in Jane Eyre, the tree that was struck by lightning. Like, I lost my mind when it was chestnut tree. So, yeah. And yeah, and the azaleas, Helen says in the comments.
Yeah, it's funny because I am normally, Taylor, like you said, I normally am very like less is more when it comes to like very descriptive writing of like settings, especially because like partly because I just don't find it as interesting as like character stuff, but also because I actually can have a hard time picturing certain ways that authors tend to describe geography. For whatever reason, it's hard for me to picture, and it just frustrates me. But this book was one of the rare cases where I actually enjoyed it. Like, I didn't feel like too much. I feel like also the reason I liked it is because it was used for something. Like the things that she was describing, even though she did describe them a lot, it was like because it added to the suspense or to the feeling of unease that you got. And actually, if we want to share quotes now, we can go ahead and do that. But I did want to mention this one, which is about the rhododendrons. Because I feel like this is such a good example of how Daphne du Maurier can take things that are not creepy, and then by the end you're like, those are weird flowers. I don't trust those flowers. So I don't know. Okay, this is like partway through chapter 7. It's page 72 in my copy. Suddenly I saw a clearing in the dark drive ahead, and a patch of sky, and in a moment the dark trees had thinned, the nameless shrubs had disappeared, and on either side of us was a wall of color, blood red, reaching far above our heads. We were amongst the rhododendrons. There was something bewildering, even shocking, about the suddenness of their discovery. The woods had not prepared me for them. They startled me with their crimson faces, massed one upon the other in incredible profusion, showing no leaf, no twig, nothing but the slaughterous red, luscious and fantastic, unlike any rhododendron plant I had seen before. I glanced at Maxim. He was smiling. Like them, he said. I told him, yes, a little breathlessly, uncertain whether I was speaking the truth or not. For to me, a rhododendron was a homely, domestic thing, strictly conventional, mauve or pink in color, standing one beside the other in a neat round bed. And these were monsters, rearing to the sky, massed like a battalion. Too beautiful, I thought, too powerful. They were not plants at all. And that's like one of my favorite quotes, which is odd because it's a description part. But I just feel like that really encapsulates some of the really great things about this book. Like, we even see how Maxim is like, don't you love those rhododendrons? And she's like, uh-huh. Like he has like no perception of how the atmosphere of Manderley feels to her. And I feel like that's a really good indication, even from the beginning, that he just does not pay attention to how she's feeling or how she's doing. I like the color, like the spotterous red, and the way that she doesn't like, they don't look like domesticated plants. Like these are monsters. I just like love all of that imagery, and I thought it was done so well. And it was extra impressive because again, I'm a hard sell when it comes to like very descriptive passages. But yes, surprisingly, I thought the descriptions were pretty well done. The only parts that I felt dragged a little is there were certain sections of the story where I'm like, this could have been a little shorter, and I think we could have gotten the same effect from it. But that was more of like a plot thing than anything else. I also think it's really interesting that a lot of the sentences, or more than I expected, are like pretty short. And I think that even though I think the book was a little longer than it needed to be, I think it kept it from dragging too much for me. And I also think it contributed to this very young character. Like, I don't know, there's something about the way it was written that made me think of how young and inexperienced the protagonist was. Yeah, so anyway, those are my thoughts on the writing. But yes, I agree. I loved the atmosphere, but I do think some parts of the book could have been like trimmed a little bit. Um, yeah, and I think the building of suspense was done really well also.
The suspense before she comes out in her costume at the party, both times I read this book, I'm like, ah! It really gets me.
I know. I at one point I like remember this time when I was reading it, I went to bed in the middle of a chapter because I was like, I can't face that tonight. It's like too stressful. Yeah, also, so Helen just mentioned the way the suspense was built when the cousin guy came to the house was amazing. I loved it. Yes, that whole like legal drama part was so good, and I was trying to remember because I remember from the movie there was a part that like took place in a courtroom, and I had forgotten that the like inciting incident for figuring out what happened is that they find the boat with Rebecca's body in it. So from that point on, I was like, oh my god! I was like, what's gonna happen? Because I remember that Maxim didn't get caught, but I didn't remember like anything else that really happened. Um, yeah. So, any thoughts about the writing before I move on here?
Beautiful.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was my favorite.
I agree. Okay, so Julia's going to be excited for this question, and I know Taylor loves this book as well. So let's compare this to Jane Eyre. And this is the question that I blatantly stole from Kier with her permission, because we were talking and she mentioned how similar they were, and I had never thought about that. And like even in some of the plot beats, like the fact that a fire is very important, certainly a similarity in love interest, I think. So first I want to hear from you guys about like comparisons between the two, and then I have a follow-up question because of course I do.
Taylor, you're our resident Jane Eyre fangirl, so I think you should take it away. I got to review my notes.
So the similarities didn't strike me at first, other than that they are both Gothic novels, but I think as it went on, I did like pick up on some of the similarities, including the sort of haunting of the place by a wife, basically. And a wife who was married to not the greatest of men, and after a while you're kind of like, was it really the wife's problem? Or was it the husband's?
Yeah.
Also, both Mr. Rochester and Max like younger women, so that's a thing.
And they're turned on by innocence.
Ugh, yes. I will say that I prefer Rochester as a character just because at least Rochester has some silly moments, like dressing up as a fortune teller.
Which Maxim refuses to dress up ever, so totally opposite there.
All I can say is there's never a dull moment with Rochester, but Max is so boring. But the similarities in terms, I think the biggest similarity for me, I know there were a lot of references to fire. I'm ashamed to say I didn't pick that up.
I didn't until Kier told me, so.
for me, the biggest one is the sort of ghostly presence of a wife sort of infiltrating this home and basically bringing about its ruin, and also the whole setting it on fire thing.
Yeah.
Rebecca doesn't set the house on fire, but like Danvers is sort of acting in the memory of Rebecca. So
yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Julia.
I'm literally going through all my yellow tabs like, yep, that one, got it. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely strongly agree that the biggest thing it has going for it is that just like haunted feeling, like Jane Eyre, you've got, I mean, even the red room at the beginning, but then like later she's like, what's this creepy laughter about? Like, what's the deal with Grace Poole? Like, all these mysteries of the house. And our main character in this book is very similar in that, like, she there's even, hold on, there was a mention of laughter that I just passed by and now I want it again. And of course I won't be able to find it easily because that's just how that goes. Hold on, it's one of these. I think it's this one. Nope. Oh, but she does describe herself as plain, which Jane also does. She says at one point, do you think the dead come back and watch the living? So that's pretty on the nose there.
And that was very Wuthering Heights to me as well.
Yeah.
Where is the stupid laugh thing I just saw? Is it this one? Nope. Okay, don't know where that quote went. I think it's very interesting that, oh wait, this is about Mrs. Danvers, but I thought it was interesting where she said, she did not hear me. She went on raving like a madwoman, a fanatic, her long fingers twisting and tearing at the black stuff of her dress, which sounded like very much of a description of Bertha in Jane Eyre, honestly.
Oh.
And then also we have, like, in Jane Eyre, like, Bluebeard is specifically mentioned at one point, and this is like way more Bluebeard to me than it is even Jane Eyre.
Right, because he did actually kill his wife.
Killed his wife and was like, don't worry about it.
Yeah,
So,
don't go in the cottage.
And while we're just talking about the fire, I do want to say too, I loved this, noticing it the second time around, but when she has that book that was from Rebecca to Maxim, she rips out the page and burns it.
Yes, and the R.
Rebecca, and I was like, okay, fire, whoa, here we are.
Yeah. No, I thought that foreshadowing was great as well. That was something I like read that and I'm like, oh.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And if racism is being mentioned, Maxim's also racist too. So great, because he has that line before the costume party. I don't know if you recall, but I went, yikes.
I don't remember that. I can believe that he would be racist.
I think there was some discussion of like brown face and
yeah, because I think Giles dressed up as a sheik.
Actually did. Yeah. But he also says to the main character when she's like hinting about her costume, he says, as long as you don't black your face and dress as a monkey or something like that.
Oh my god.
Oh wow.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Maxim, yikes.
I remember that one.
We might as well just stack racism up on there too.
Yeah. It's already bad enough. So there you go.
Yeah. I agree with those parallels you mentioned. Like the ones that really stood out to me, after being prepped for it by talking to Kier, because like it had never occurred to me before, are like 95% of the men are trash in both of these. And I also saw a few parallels between Jane and this protagonist, although I like Jane much more, and I think she's a much more active and like developed character. But I think in terms of circumstances, they're kind of similar. Like she's entering into this different class and like this different world, and her romantic partner has not prepared her for any of it and has kept massive secrets from her. Yeah, I differ from you guys in that I hate Rochester so much more than Maxim. Like I don't like Maxim at all, but I think one of the differences for me is that the way Rebecca is written, the main character is obviously in love with Maxim, but I don't think the book is like written as like it's trying to convince us that it's romantic, you know? Whereas with Jane Eyre, that is a romance, and I think it fails as a romance for me because I find no redeeming qualities in Rochester. Like, I don't even believe that he really loves her, because the way that he talks to her and treats her, it's like, yeah, maybe you love her underneath this, but if you never show it, I don't think it counts. And he also, like, Rochester just does not, he seems to not even understand Jane at like critical moments of the book. And he has to literally be set on fire to become a better person, which I had some big problems with. And yeah, but like, honestly, I think one of the biggest things, it comes back to the way the book is written. Like, I think Jane Eyre is supposed to sell me on them as a romantic couple, and I don't think Rebecca is so much. That obviously that could also be opinion, but it's like, even though I think we're probably supposed to like Maxim more than we do, I don't think it's like romanticizing them, which like that was another thing that, like, in Wuthering Heights, we talked about how like Heathcliff and Cathy, I don't think the actual book is written in a way that glamorizes that, even though people afterwards have talked about it like a great romance. But I don't think the book itself does. And that's kind of how I feel with Rebecca, is like, even though I do think we're supposed to like him more than we do, it at least isn't written in a way that is like trying to write off their relationship as a great love story. Whereas in Jane Eyre, I do get that impression, and I hate it.
Excuse me a minute. I'll be right back.
Okay.
Keep talking.
Yeah, so I think that was pretty much like my main point there. But yeah, I think like some of the imagery is very similar. I think like definitely the Gothic tone and everything that we've been talking about, very similar. So then my follow-up question, which we've kind of talked about already, is, are there similarities between the books that worked better for you in one than in the other?
Like I said, I personally prefer Rochester to Max de Winter, and I don't know if part of that is that the movie, because I was introduced to Rebecca through the film, and the film is trying to sell Max de Winter to you because it's Laurence Olivier playing him.
Yes.
They're going to sell Laurence Olivier.
Yes, they are.
And at least with Jane Eyre, Rochester doesn't really marry her and then thrust her into this with no knowledge. Like, he sometimes brings her in with the rich people, but like, he doesn't just sort of shove her in there and then basically ignore her for a lot of the book, and then get mad at her when she makes a mistake that he didn't really teach her or like tell her about. I do get what you mean about Rochester, and I think part of why I'm more partial to Rochester is that I never read him as romantic from the beginning. I was like, oh, this man's just a clown. So I was just kind of like, okay, I'm not going to take him seriously. Whereas Max de Winter has, I don't think anything about him. Like, he doesn't even do anything wild, like dress up as a fortune teller to try and see if his crush likes him.
At least give us some interest, Max.
You're gonna be a fool, at least be an amusing one. Come on now.
Yeah. And I feel like the twist with the wife I like better in Rebecca than I do in Jane Eyre, and I think that's just because there's less ableism involved.
Yes.
You know, and it doesn't redeem Max. Like, he does kill Rebecca at the end, and that is more permanent, but Rochester just locked his wife away in an attic and then didn't tell his soon-to-be bride, by the way, I've got an attic wife.
Yeah.
I feel like the sort of, and I also feel like at least Rebecca has more agency in the book, and yeah, like I said, there's less ableism, she has more agency, and I think that gives her a little bit more power in the book. So her presence really has more of an impact. Yeah.
I think also, like when you were talking about like the way that Maxim like ignores her, ignores the main character and talks to her, that is a good point. I think also, like, in my mind, the way they treat their love interest is more similar, because I really didn't like the way that Rochester talked to Jane. Like, every once in a while, there'd be a really good romantic line, but it seemed like most of their interactions, he was belittling her and trying to make her feel stupid. And to me, that's kind of on a level with what Maxim does, where he's like, I'm going to pat your head like you're a dog and talk about you like you're a child. Like, neither of those are okay, but they felt kind of similar to me. I do think, though, it's like, yeah, Maxim actually murdered his wife. Although Rochester did keep his, as you said, like, he imprisoned her, and like, I mean, I think the way the book is written, we're supposed to feel like, oh, he did the best he could, but it's like, I can't help thinking if you treated her better, that she wouldn't have deteriorated so quickly. But that's just my opinion. We don't know that from the book. But yeah, I feel like Rochester and Maxim do have a lot of similarities. And I think, so one of the things that I was saying to Kier when we were talking about this is, it's like hard for me to put into words exactly why, even though they do have a lot of similarities, why like Rochester makes my skin crawl every time he's on page. Whereas Maxim, I'm like, I hate you and you're the worst, but it doesn't like repulse me. Which I think that might also come down to the way that the books are framed, as like Jane Eyre is more of a romance, and I think that I'm supposed to be like sold on him at least by the end of the book. Whereas with Rebecca, I don't think we're supposed to be necessarily satisfied with the relationship between the two main characters. But I also, like, Taylor, you were mentioning that there were these other factors why you might be like more like biased towards Rochester. I think I definitely have some of those with Maxim, because again, like, I really like the 1940 movie, and I find Laurence Olivier super charming. So like, I think that even though I don't picture book Maxim as like movie Maxim, I think maybe some of that is creeping in to like my feelings, because like Laurence Olivier. Yeah, anyway, I don't know where I was going with that, but Julia, your thoughts.
I feel like my thoughts have escaped somewhat, but they're pretty neck and neck for me. I think especially at the beginning, more so of main character and Maxim's relationship feels very much like the beginning of like Jane and Rochester's relationship, even though she's not Maxim's employee. She just feels like very out of place. She's thrown into these social situations and she's like, why am I here? I wasn't prepared for this. Like, all of that feels very similar to me. But then I do err on Taylor's side, where like Rochester doesn't make my skin crawl versus Maxim, but I mean, neither of them are my ideal, man.
Yeah.
Real. But yeah, it's there's very interesting parallels to draw there. And even I should have actually looked up the quote when Rochester's like describing how he became married to Bertha, because I marked the one where Maxim is like, our marriage was a sham from the beginning and did all this stuff. And she's like, or he's saying like, she wasn't even normal. And I was like, oh, this is like making something fire off in my brain. But
yeah. Okay, we're getting close to the end of my notes here. Okay, so if you don't have any more thoughts on Jane Eyre as compared to this book, so I have like kind of a plot/resolution question. So with the ending of this book, like with the way that like the second inquest turns out, and the very end of the novel, and also just like the things that we find out about what happened, do you guys feel that justice has been done?
No. I know it would be embarrassing and it was so taboo at the time, but Maxim really could have just divorced Rebecca. It's so much easier than murder. And I feel like at the end of the day, like, obviously Rebecca was sort of egging him on, but he pulled the trigger. He made that choice, then panicked, and then instead of, I don't know, maybe coming clean, because it seems like everyone's sort of in his favor anyway.
Yeah.
He puts her in a boat and just sort of like, breaks it. And
yeah.
I don't know. It's just so crazy. Like, it's so convoluted, and I don't know. I just can't get over the fact that he murdered someone, and even like the cop kind of knew, or the detective, and just was like, okay.
Like, it's like, well, this is the boys' club, so like we're on your
Yeah.
side, like women.
Yeah.
Am I right? Like,
Yeah, and we've been saying, like, Rebecca's actions aren't great, but I don't think it's necessarily like it doesn't warrant death. Just a
yeah,
divorce.
exactly. And that's one of the things that I kept coming back to too. Is like, was Rebecca awful? Yes. Did she deserve to get murdered for it? No, I don't think so. Yeah. And Julia, I'm gonna have you answer, but I want to pull up a couple of these comments before I forget. So Nana brought up, which Taylor you mentioned originally, that he in fact brought the gun with him before Rebecca like talked to him. So like there was at least some element of premeditation there. And then Kier also said she thinks it interesting that she thinks Julia and Taylor read Jane Eyre first, and Kara and I. Well, this is weird to say my own name like that. Me and Kier read Rebecca first, and our alignments show. I think that's a very good point. I think
Yeah.
there's a lot of classics that end up lining up like that, and I didn't think about that. Also, Nina says Maxim should have gone to jail. The narrator should have inherited the house and married Frank. I agree.
Ending. I love it.
I agree with that. So, Julia, now your thoughts on the question.
Yeah. The whole inquest and all of that related to it just read so privileged. Like, allow me to invite the investigator over for dinner beforehand and we'll chat because we're old pals. And then, of course, when the evidence comes up, he's like, oh, well, maybe it's this. Like, it just, yeah, it all was very, it all seemed not very above board in terms of following the law. So, yeah. I mean, and it's like, what can you do? Because, I mean, she's already dead and she wanted to be dead, but I don't, yeah. Murderers still please go to jail. Like, I don't know what to say.
Yeah. I agree with both of you guys, and it's weird because like there's that natural bias towards what the main character wants to happen of a book that you read. At least I feel like this happens. To bring up TV tropes again, I think they call it like protagonist centered morality or something like that, where basically like because something is done by a main character, we assume it's going to be the right thing, even though like if another character did it, we would think differently maybe. So it's interesting because as I'm reading all of this like legal investigative drama, it's like there's a lot of tension built around what's going to happen, and there's like almost that split second of like, oh no, he's gonna get caught, and then it's like, wait, but he should get caught, like he's the murderer. Like, yeah. So I agree with you guys. I also don't think justice has been done. Yeah, I do also like find the way that the book ends. It's like I'm sorry for the main character that she won't get to be happy at Manderley, but I'm like I find it interesting and I guess appropriately ironic that Maxim loses Manderley when that was like kind of the thing that pushed him over the edge to kill Rebecca. Is she implies that like a bastard, or not even a bastard, but like a bastard who was also a product of an affair, like who wasn't his child, would inherit this, that his home that means so much to him. So and then he loses it at the end. So I thought that was kind of appropriate. Like, I mean, I think like Manderley is such a great like setting that I'm a little sad it's gone because it just like it's such a great place to read about. But in terms of like Maxim finally getting punished for something, I was like, I'm not sorry for you. Sorry for the main character. Yeah, and I think also, is it implied that Jack was the one who called Mrs. Danvers about what happened?
That's kind of what I assumed.
I think it kind of was. So, yeah, and like Jack, it's so funny because he's written as like this like scumbag and like really sleazy and no one likes him. And I'm like, okay, but he is trying to get the murderer caught. Like normally this is a good thing. Yeah. Oh, Kier mentions the real question is, could she ever have been happy at Manderley? I think that's a good point. Yeah. And also, Nana pointed out, yes, I found that so weird. They like the doctor throws in that Rebecca was infertile, and he even says he's like, this has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but she couldn't even have babies. And then he like moved on, and I was like, that's odd.
I think it was all a red herring because like she's described as being like more feeble and weak in those scenes leading up to that murder.
Yeah.
And then she has that antagonistic, like, oh, and maybe I'll have a baby, and na. And so then when it's implied that she's been to a women's doctor, it's like, what does that mean? Why was she there? And then the guy's like, oh, by the way, though, she couldn't have children. So I liked it.
That's a good point. That would make sense for them to bring it up. Because, like, the only way I could really interpret it, I'm like, is this supposed to, like, draw attention to, like, Rebecca wasn't even womanly because she, like, couldn't have children or something? Because, like, the main character imagined several times having children. And I thought maybe that was another, like, contrast between them. But that makes more sense.
Probably both, though, honestly.
Who knows? There's something else I was going to say about your comment, Julia, and I can't remember what it was. What were we just talking about? The doctor and I think actually, like, when Rebecca is confronting Maxim, I got the impression that she was actually telling him, like, she was lying to him and saying that she was pregnant.
Yes, that's how I read it too.
Okay, yeah. I don't even think she was like saying this could happen in the future. She's like, I'm gonna have a kid and you're gonna have to pretend it's yours. Because what would people say?
Hypothetically, but I read that too, as she was implying, like, and I'm pregnant right now, and it's definitely not yours, you little jerk.
Exactly. Yeah. Which, yeah, I feel like all these questions come back to Maxim being the worst because, like, yes, she is bad, but he did murder her. Like,
I guess this adds to the idea that, like, well, at least Maxim didn't murder a pregnant woman.
Yeah.
Bare minimum.
Right. He's like, yeah. Okay, I think, let's see. Julia, do you want to share your Taylor Swift thoughts before we, like, kind of wrap up?
I would love to. Okay, so there's lots of theories about Taylor Swift and the book Rebecca. She sings about Rebecca in her song The Last Great American Dynasty, so it could be about her if you think about it that way. But also everyone's like, Tolerate It is about Rebecca, and I'm like, wrong, because in the bridge, the singer, the person who's the point of view of the song is like, what if I left you? What if I did this? What if I stood up to you? And I'm like, she would never say those things. However, if you go back to Lover era Taylor Swift, homework, listen to Afterglow and tell me that that is not a song from Maxim's point of view to the main character.
Ooh.
And hello, Afterglow as a title, first of all, very last page of Rebecca-ish. So just that's everyone's homework, is go look up those lyrics to Afterglow and be like, is this Maxim? Because I think it is.
Okay.
We should put together a playlist for this episode. And honestly, it's just Taylor Swift.
and then one song that is Rebecca by Meg and Dia, because they have a song about that book too.
Ooh.
It's definitely like
this comes up in my music taste, but I'm like, Rebecca, this song's about Rebecca. This one too.
Well, but it's definitely like a story that I think still captures people's imaginations. I mean, like, we're getting remakes of it still. Like, they're doing all these like fancy anniversary editions. Like, it's still, I think, remembered as Daphne du Maurier's like masterpiece. Yeah, there's something about it we just find very compelling. Okay, so really quick, I wanted to talk about the movie, like the 1940 movie, which Taylor is our resident expert on. I have not seen it in a while, but I have seen it. And Julia, you said you were not able to watch it, which is fine, because our last one that I hosted, I did not even watch the movie, so it's okay.
I intend to watch it at some point, but feel free to talk about any and everything. So
okay, because like the question I have about the movie is like, and Taylor, you can fact check me on this in case I misremember something. But something I found very interesting is, so not only does the movie change what Maxim did, and I think this was also related to the Hays Code because I don't think they could show spouses murdering each other. So instead, what happens in the film is, I think Rebecca, I think she still implies to Maxim that she's carrying a child that's not his. Is that correct, Taylor?
Yes.
Okay, but then instead of shooting her, she falls. Like, I don't know if Maxim pushes her or if she falls herself, and she hits her head and dies. So it's an accidental death that he then covers up. So not murder. And yeah, so like I want to know how you guys feel about that change. Like, I think it was probably made for censorship reasons, but I do think it makes this like an interesting story discussion. And there's another difference in the movie that I think this is how it happened. Taylor, you will have to check me again. But the twist in the novel, or one of the twists in the novel, is like when Maxim is finally explaining to the main character, he says, like the big reveal is that he murdered Rebecca, and that's like the big shock. And for a few chapters, you don't actually know the backstory because the main character is like, "This means he didn't love her. This is the best thing that's ever happened to me." And I'm like, "Okay, calm down. Like, please just make some other friends who would tell you that this is bad news." So that's how it happens in the book. And I think in the movie, the shock is that first Maxim says, "I didn't love Rebecca, I hated her." And then you find out, okay, that is how it happens, Taylor.
Yes.
So that I find very interesting because I think that change is more of like a storytelling choice than like a, I guess like a we can't show something on screen, because even though in the movie he technically didn't murder her, I think they could have still kept the sequence of events the same. So I find it interesting that they changed that plot twist. This was a very rambling question,
sorry.
so I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry. So I totally forgot. He did mention that he put Rebecca's body in the boat first, and then the narrator says something like, I thought you loved Rebecca or something. And then he says, loved Rebecca, I hated her. So he does reveal that he put her body there. He didn't say that he had killed her. Also,
Okay.
sorry. So the production code, you could show a husband and wife killing each other. The real thing was you couldn't show someone murdering someone in cold blood and have them get away with it. They either have to die or be jailed by the end. There has to be some sort of punishment. And so they changed it because to Maxim hitting Rebecca, and then she falls and hits the thing, because you could show couples hitting each other.
Yeah. And manslaughter was fine.
What's a little manslaughter between spouses?
Yeah, which I guess, I mean, ethically, manslaughter is different than murder, but it is interesting that, like, yeah, the lines they drew are sometimes interesting, to say the least. Yeah, so I guess my very rambling question to you guys comes down to, what do you think about those two changes, and how do you think those reflect on the story? Like, just like thoughts on that film in general. I know, Julia, you haven't seen it, but like just like those changes in theory, what do you think about them? So there's the one about how Maxim did not actually murder Rebecca in the movie, and also how like one of the big reveals is not that he killed somebody, it's that he did not actually love Rebecca.
I mean, as the person who doesn't know as much, I'll go first because I think I have shorter thoughts. I kind of like, okay, I don't like that it wasn't him, but I do like her falling off the cliff versus being shot, because that goes back to the scene where they drove up to the cliffside and he thought about pushing her off. Like, I love parallels. So I enjoy that thought.
I should have clarified that she doesn't fall off the cliff. She like falls and hits her head on like a table or something. Okay, it's like
never mind. I hate it.
It's in, I think it's in the cottage still, and it's like she hits herself on a piece of furniture and dies.
Oh, that's boring.
I mean, like, I know it happens to people, but yeah, it's a much less, I guess, dynamic scene.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Then scrap what I said. I don't like that. I think you should have killed her. I don't
commit, Maxim.
Wish he had. And okay, maybe you'll change my mind about this one when I say this too, but I kind of like him saying first, like, no, I didn't love her. I hated her, because if we're still doing that, like, protagonist-centric morality, like, that is more important to our main character. Like, she doesn't care about whether her husband's a murderer. She cares about whether he's still in love with his late wife. So
Yeah.
that reveal is like, to her, like, oh, a whole new world. Like, wow, okay. So I kind of like that. And then it's like, as an audience, oh, and I disguised her death, and oops, don't worry about it.
Did you say don't worry about it?
Yeah, that's what Maxim says. He's like, don't worry about that part.
Yeah. Like he says really fast, he's like, no, I never loved Rebecca. Also, I left her body in a boat. It's fine, don't worry. Yeah, I also like, I think that, so I've said that I prefer movie Maxim to book Maxim just because I think Laurence Olivier pulls off the charming thing a lot better. And I also think that just with the traditions of movie casting, the age gap is not so gross. Because I don't think Joan Fontaine was like his age, but I don't think she was like 20 to his 45 or whatever.
I mean, neither was Lily James, though. I don't know. Anyways.
What's that?
Lily James wasn't even young enough for that role. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure she did a good job acting it, but I was like, really? Okay.
Yeah. So that's part of it. And I seem to remember that even though he's still not a great husband to her, he doesn't like outright neglect her as much. He doesn't like pat her like a dog or tell her that she's like his daughter or like a child or something. So that's another plus. So I like that because I already like the movie Maxim better. I feel like the fact that he tells her first that he didn't love Rebecca shows, to me, it shows that he is more like actually loving, like that he does actually love the main character. That's more convincing to me in the movie because he was like, oh no, like you've been thinking that I loved Rebecca. I didn't. I hated her. Whereas in the book, he's like, I murdered my first wife, and she's like, tell me more.
Right.
So yeah, that's that's how I feel about that.
Because in the book, it feels. Sorry, I know.
Oh no, I'm sorry. I just interrupted you.
Yeah, in the book, it feels like he's like, "Hey, absolve me for this, because I'm just confessing what's been weighing me down." Oh, you were concerned I didn't love you? Yeah, I do. Don't worry. Like, that's the afterthought.
Yes,
So that makes sense to me what you said, Kara.
For sure. And Taylor, what are your thoughts?
So it makes Maxim look a lot better when it's an accident because he doesn't shoot her or kill her out of malice. He does hit her, but that was kind of, I guess, what Rebecca was gunning for, like some sort of act of violence. And it does make more sense that if he accidentally killed her, then he would panic, I guess, and then put her on the boat and like disguise. Once again, he could have just divorced her, but you know what? But also, like, just to go into the cinematography of that scene, for those of you who haven't seen the movie, when they walk through the murder, they sort of go throughout the boathouse. So it'll be like she was smoking next to an ashtray full of cigarettes, and it'll show the ashtray, and then it'll be like she got up, and the camera will move up, and it's just so well done. Sorry, I'm fangirling.
Please.
Love the movie. I have really problems with the film, but I love it.
I really want to like rewatch it. I thought I owned it and I didn't. I was hoping to rewatch it before seeing this.
I have a tip. So there are apparently a couple of videos, like some people have uploaded Rebecca the entire movie on YouTube and it hasn't been taken down, so I assume you can just do that. But yeah, if you want to watch Rebecca, just type in Rebecca Hitchcock and you'll
okay. I'm gonna do that. Also, Kier has mentioned that she just Googled and Laurence Olivier and Joan Fontaine were 10 years apart, which is much more reasonable.
Yeah, and one of the things I did like about the movie was that they didn't explicitly say ages. Like, they mentioned that Maxim is older than the narrator and that there is a significant age gap. But in my mind, I'm like, okay, she's 22 and he's maybe 32. It's still not great at that age, but I can stomach it a bit more.
Yes. Yes.
So that made me more comfortable with the relationship. I totally forgot the questions. I'm just talking about the movie now.
No, that was it was a very vague question. So you're doing great. Basically, I was just asking how you felt about the changes. Like the two I mentioned were that Maxim did not kill Rebecca. He didn't murder her outright. And the reveal being changed. How in the movie it's that like you first find out that he didn't love Rebecca.
Yeah. I think it also reflects, I guess, like, not, it doesn't, I guess it reflects better on the main character too, when he says, like, I didn't love Rebecca, I hated her, and then he talks about, like, how he accidentally killed her, as opposed to just saying, like, here's how I killed her, and the main character being like, oh my god, you're so funny.
Yeah.
And I think that reflects a little better on the narrator. And it actually makes the two characters and everyone else around them who knows about the true circumstances of Rebecca's death, it makes them seem a lot better because it's an accident, as opposed to, you know, everyone knowing that he just shot her.
Yeah. That's a really good point. I had not thought of how that also reflects better on everybody else. Because I was like super bothered by the magistrate. Like it's strongly implying that like he even like after the doctor's evidence, he had figured out that Maxim did kill her, and he was like, "It's fine though, don't worry about it." Because and it's weird too, because initially he's like not very receptive to Jack's evidence, but then as that like scene goes on, he gets more and more suspicious, and like the main character starts worrying. So it seems like he is gonna actually pursue justice, and then at the end, it's like, oh my god, just kidding. Like you're rich, you're fine. Like, as Julia said, that whole like sequence, it just like reeks of privilege. Like it just, yeah. And then, so the other thing I was going to say about the movie, which we have talked a little bit about, is I think also taking the movie as a whole, I feel like I buy the romantic relationship between Maxim and the main character a lot more. And specifically, I actually believe that he does love her from the beginning, and he's not just like marrying her as like a make himself feel better kind of thing, which I think is common. I think like in general, movie adaptations tend to like smooth out some of the edges with things like that, which I don't always mind, honestly. Like sometimes I'm like, yes, I want to root for them more. Please, like, please do that. But that's one thing that I think also the movie leaves me feeling much more like invested. Like I'm like, I do kind of care if you guys are happy together. Whereas in the book, I'm like, just Frank, take her and go. Like, get her out of here.
I think part of it is because you see them actually together as a couple, and you're given like little moments of levity, which also makes the contrast between like Maxim getting angry with her or Rebecca coming in between them like much harder to watch, because you do see moments of them enjoying each other's company. So like the scene I'm thinking of is, and this isn't in the book, but like they have video footage of their honeymoon, and you see like, you know, the narrator feeding ducks and like Maxim like looking at the camera and then like sticking out his tongue, and it makes him seem like a little more goofy, a little more lighthearted. And then after that, the scene switches to when it's revealed that the narrator broke the China Cupid, and that like then he gets mad at her because she says something that he doesn't like, and it's just sort of like, whoa, the whiplash.
Yeah. Julia, were you going to say something?
That was just the cutest thing that he stuck his tongue out.
Yeah,
it's really why don't give me that and then hurt me like this.
I know. Like it's been so long since I saw the movie that I have forgotten a lot of those details. So I am like ready to be charmed by Laurence Olivier all over again. Not that he's perfect in the movie, but just Taylor, as you've said, the bar is like just subterranean. Like it is so easy to improve on Book Maxim. Okay, I think that is like finally all the specific discussion questions I had. We also, like, if you guys want to share some favorite quotes, I already shared mine about those scary rhododendrons, which is just like a masterful piece of writing. Because, like, imagine finding rhododendrons creepy, but like I do by the end of that paragraph.
Yeah. I got to figure out which quote I want to share, but yes, I love quotes. Let's do it.
The problem of reading the audiobook is that you're like, oh, I know these quotes, but I haven't marked them.
Yes, I know. Sometimes, like, if I didn't have like the copy available, or if I didn't mark them as we went, I would sometimes look it up on Goodreads, and a lot of times the ones that I wanted to talk about are like the very popular ones.
Yeah. So the one I have, and I Googled Rebecca quotes from Daphne du Maurier. So this one is, the moment of crisis had come, and I must face it. My old fears, my diffidence, my shyness, my hopeless sense of inferiority must be conquered now and thrust aside. If I failed now, I should fail forever. And I thought it was a very good narrator moment.
Yeah.
Also,
that's right before. Oh, I'm sorry, Taylor. I just interrupted you.
No, I was just going to say Daphne du Maurier is such a skilled writer that it just reads so well.
Mhm.
Yes. And I think, isn't that part right before that where she basically like puts Mrs. Danvers in her place? Because I found that very satisfying. Like, it's such a brief moment of like courage, because then everything just hits the fan. But I really like that that little bit of happiness she gets after she finds out her husband killed his wife.
Yeah.
But I was glad that she was able to find some courage out of it, I guess. Kier said, it took me months to read because I copied half of the book into a notebook. Relatable. Yeah, this is why I like never I hardly ever like tab or like write down quotes, because it would just be like so much. If I'm reading a book. Julia, did you find your quote?
Yeah, I think I'm going to share the first quote that I saved, which is very early. It's only chapter 5, but I love this line. Well, I'll read a little bit past it because it's just a good part in general. But I am glad it cannot happen twice, the fever of first love. For it is a fever, and a burden too, whatever the poets may say. They are not brave, the days when we are 21. They are full of little cowardices, little fears without foundation, and one is so easily bruised, so swiftly wounded, one falls to the first barbed word. I just love that. I love quotes about youth.
It's what?
I love quotes about youth, you know?
Yeah. That was one of the ones I really liked as well. I think a lot of the passages about being 21 are like, yeah. Like when there's a few times where she's talking about how like if I had been older, it wouldn't have bothered me, but everything, like you waste so much time thinking about how people think about you, and I'm like, yep.
Takes me back.
Yeah. Not that long ago, if I'm being honest. Like, still sometimes happens, but especially around that age. Yes, I really like that one as well. Did you guys have any like things that you wanted to talk about specifically?
Nothing major. I do want to mention one thing about Beatrice that made me laugh near the end of the book, when like I guess the sort of like idea that like Rebecca had been murdered were sort of bubbling up, and Beatrice called them, and she was like, it could have been communists. I just thought that was so funny.
Like, what?
Yeah, I remember that part. Like, it was just out of nowhere. And doesn't she say, she's like, it could have been coming. She's like, it seems like the sort of thing they would do. It's like, what?
And the narrator's like, no.
Yeah. The narrator's like, I don't see why they would do that. So just let it go, Beatrice.
I think Beatrice even says, she's like, no, I think we're onto something. And the characters are like, no, like we're really not. Like, oh my gosh.
That was all I wanted to share. I thought it was fantastic.
No, I love that. I'm glad you brought that up because I hadn't marked that. It could have been communists, you know. Oh my goodness.
Gosh, have you guys seen the Clue, the movie?
No, yes. But I know of it.
Communism was just a red herring.
I love that.
Okay, so if we're good on discussion, I want to mention that our next book will be The Picture of Dorian Gray. There's a beautiful edition that Julia is holding up, and it will be on her channel. We'll obviously announce the date as we get closer, but it generally is the closest Sunday to the end of the month. So if you want to plan for that. And also, I think we should have our next announcement of like the next round of books going up soon, which is very exciting. We are very excited about these next picks. I think that's everything I had to say. Anything to add, you guys?
No, super excited for Dorian Gray though.
Me too.
It's going to be interesting.
Is it everyone's first read or is it a reread for anyone?
It'll be my first read.
It's a reread for me.
Okay. It's my first read. So
Okay. Excited to discuss some Oscar Wilde, you know? 'Cause you might guess by my channel name, I'm a fan. Okay, so thank you guys all. That's weird. Thank all of you guys so much for joining us, especially for this marathon discussion. But there's a lot to say about Rebecca, like especially adding like some of the movie discussion into that. But thank you for being here. We really appreciated your guys' contributions as always. It's so much fun to like have you contribute to the discussion. And yeah, we will see you for the next one. And I think that's everything. Bye. Don't marry a middle-aged man.
unless you ask if he's a murderer first.
Yeah.